Cut. The year is 2021. Sometime during a particularly chilly morning in January, former comic actor turned president Volodymyr Zelensky makes an appeal to his American counterpart, Joe Biden, to open the doors of NATO for Ukraine. In doing so, he sets off the most disastrous chain of events to mar the 21st century, essentially bringing the modern world on the cusp of a war that, if escalated, would send us centuries back. For in seeking an alliance with the United States of America, Zelensky incited the wrath of one Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, the enigmatic president of Russia, who was once heralded for his vision and statesmanship in reinstating Russia to its former glory, and is now wanted in the International Criminal Court for war crimes. Sit back and relax as we recount to you the rise, the pinnacle, and the ever-nearing decline of a people's president turned despot who holds the cards to end the world as we know it. The rise. Vladimir Putin was named acting president of Russia on the 31st of December 1999 by then-President Boris Yeltsin.
Мне бы Владимира Владимировича Путина. Я положу трубку.
Putin inherited a nation reeling from the aftermath of the Soviet era, crippled by debt, with an economy so frail that Russia had defaulted its international debts merely a year ago. The youth grappled with unemployment, and poverty governed the fate of many as oligarchs wielded a ridiculous amount of power. Power so significant that the politicians and leaders of Russia were mere puppets in their fingers. Throw in the looming threat to national safety presented by Chechnya serving as a hotbed of extremism and separatism, and you have a nation teetering on its last legs. Putin established himself with a callous display of authority in 2002 when Chechen militants had taken more than 800 civilians hostage in the Moscow theater.
Gunmen armed with explosives raided the building in the capital, Moscow.
With brutal finality, Putin had put an end to the siege, authorizing the use of a poisonous gas that killed the rebels and many hostages as collateral. With this, he had sent a message. He would not negotiate with terrorists. This aversion to negotiations where the interests of Russia hang in the balance has been a running theme in Putin's presidency. With his authority now established, Putin turned on the oligarchs who ran Russia. In 2003, oil tycoon Mikhail Khodorkovsky was arrested and charged with fraud. He was later found guilty and jailed in a case that his supporters say was punishment for his meddling in politics. With his position secured, Putin began efforts to resuscitate the economy. He launched a string of tax reforms aimed to attract foreign investment and boost entrepreneurship. He cut down the borrowings and brought in anti-inflation measures, reforming and modernizing the energy sector, which accounts for the majority of Russia's exports, was the masterstroke that secured him another term as president with a landslide victory of more than 70% of the votes. Putin's economic reforms reduced Russia's debt burden significantly and boosted the country's creditworthiness. He then aimed to diversify Russia's economy by promoting industries and reducing its reliance on natural resources, thereby making it more resilient to price fluctuations. This move would serve as the saving grace for Russia's economy in the near future, when Putin's actions would soon invite worldwide sanctions.
We're hearing that the numbers are really very large. A Russian television channel is saying that more than 300 are dead.
Putin's image among the Russian people took a severe hit when a school in Beslan was seized by Islamist fighters who had taken more than 1,000 people hostage. The siege ended with a total of 334 hostages killed, more than half of them children. Parents said the authorities botched the handling of the siege and blamed Putin. Amidst this outrage, Putin proceeded to scrap direct elections for regional governors, effectively making them Kremlin appointees. This marked the beginning of Putin's transition from democratic leadership to an authoritarian facade of democracy. The Pinnacle. The stage is now set for his descent along a path once treaded by the likes of Joseph Stalin. The year is 2006. Journalist Anna Politkovskaya, a critic of rights abuses in Chechnya, is murdered in Moscow on Putin's birthday. Kremlin critic Alexander Litvinenko dies in London that same year after being poisoned with a radioactive substance. Putin now instilled fear and trepidation where he once inspired awe and admiration.
And we shall be happy to see you in Russia and in Sochi as our guests. Monsieur le Président, membres du CIO, Mesdames et Messieurs, soutenez s'il vous plaît le rêve olympique des millions de Russes qui attendent votre décision avec l'espoir. Je vous remercie.
The following year would see Putin become prime minister after his ally Dmitry Medvedev became president, owing to constitutional limits on him serving more than 2 consecutive presidential terms. Russia then fought and won a short war against Georgia. In 2012, Putin returned to the presidency, having won re-elections with over 60% of the vote after a decision to extend presidential terms from 4 years to 6 years. Large anti-Putin protests occurred before and after the vote, with critics alleging voter fraud. In early February 2014, Russia hosted the Winter Olympic Games, and before the month ended, Russian troops had begun annexing Ukraine's Crimea region, drawing condemnation from the West and sanctions from the European Union. Emboldened by Russia's self-sufficiency, Putin turned his attention to the Middle East, virtually unbothered by the sanctions. Russia launched airstrikes in Syria, turning the tide of the conflict in President Bashar al-Assad's favor. Russia's intervention in Syria contributed to a shift in geopolitical dynamics in the Middle East. It strengthened Russia's influence in the region and altered the balance of power. The move also won Russia the support of Iraq, Iran, Syria, China, and Turkey. In 2016, Donald Trump won the US presidential elections after promising to improve battered ties with Moscow. US authorities later determined that Russia had tried to interfere in the election in Trump's favor, casting a pall over the US-Russia ties, despite Moscow's denials. Meanwhile, Putin went on to win a landslide re-election victory and a mandate to stay in office until 2024. The decline. Circling back to where we began, Zelensky's appeal to join NATO served as gasoline, fueling the embers that have long smoldered between Russia and Ukraine, to an inferno that would leave Ukraine in ruins. A month after the appeal, Russia started a significant military buildup near the Russo-Ukrainian border, which continued to increase until February 2022 in both Russia and Belarus. Putin and his officials denied any intentions of military action against Ukraine. Putin essentially played the same card he had dealt in the annexation of Crimea. While the annexation of Crimea showcased Putin as a capable and authoritarian leader, his handling of Ukraine portrayed him in a more paranoid and insecure light. This was because Putin never declared outright war on Ukraine, choosing instead to declare Russian-controlled territories in Ukraine as independent states and sending troops to these territories as peacekeepers, while Russia's Federation Council authorized these peacekeepers to use military force. If you think things can't get more ridiculous than this, you're wrong. Within 3 days of sending peacekeepers, Putin announced a special military operation in Ukraine to protect the people in Russian-controlled Ukrainian territories, citing false claims of a genocide being perpetrated there by the Kyiv regime. Putin accused the Ukrainian government of being neo-Nazis controlled by the West, actively developing military infrastructure and nuclear weapons to threaten Russia. Have you ever had one of these moments where you send an army to your neighbor in an effort to spread peace and harmony, but turns out the neighbors are a bunch of neo-Nazis making nuclear weapons to obliterate you, all because the West told them to? No? Well, then you'll never understand what Putin's been through. What followed is what you have already seen across multiple news channels. Typical of any war, tens of thousands were killed on both sides, with Russian troops causing mass civilian casualties and setting off Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War II. On the other hand, Russia faces economic sanctions, global isolation, and resource depletion on a large scale, as Putin's image suffers both domestically and internationally. Cast as an aggressor on the world stage, this is the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin. The arrest of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, whose investigation once accused Putin of using fraudulently obtained funds to build a massive estate near Gelendzhik and Krasnodar Krai, calling it the world's biggest bribe, marked Putin's departure from democracy. His violent suppression of the resulting protests across Russia solidified his image as a ruthless despot. On June 24, 2023, a band of armed mercenaries swept through his country almost unopposed, covering about 750 kilometers in a single day, capturing 2 significant cities and advancing within 200 kilometers of Moscow, before withdrawing unharmed, leaving Putin's pride shattered. This group of mercenaries, called the Wagner, were private military contractors who had committed war crimes on 3 continents. Their leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, a former convict turned restaurateur, turned murderous mercenary, led the mutiny that exposed the incompetence of the Russian army. Prigozhin's subsequent disappearance, Putin's claims of failed negotiations with the Wagner chief, and the Kremlin's touts of a prevented civil war bear no significance on the fact that the Russian intelligence failed to anticipate a mutiny of this scale under the presidency of a former spy. Once celebrated as a formidable and influential leader, Putin's fall from grace into an out-of-touch despot, unable to quell a significant mutiny, has left him with a shattered legacy and waning esteem, both within Russia and beyond its borders. Will he rise from the ashes to reclaim the mantle of glory and admiration, or is this the end for Vladimir Putin? You tell us.
Je vous remercie.